What if I told you that right now, as you listen to this, Europe's forests are actually expanding?
Right.
Like the physical footprint of the trees is growing, and at the exact same time, the amount of land they need for agriculture across the continent is shrinking.
Which sounds amazing, right?
Yeah. I mean, on paper, that sounds like this unprecedented environmental victory. It sounds like nature is, finally taking the wheel back from us.
Right. It triggers this deep sense of relief.
Exactly. But, and here's the massive slap in the face we're exploring today. What if I told you that this lush green landscape you're picturing is, well, it's a complete optical illusion?
It's just a mask.
Yeah, a mast hiding an ecological life support system that is rapidly ticking toward a silent, total collapse.
And that's the ultimate paradox here.
Yeah.
You look at the surface, the expanding tree lines, the green canopy, and you assume the system is healing.
Right.
But if you actually look at the data from the soil, the water tables, the thermal layers, it tells a terrifying story. The vital organs of the continent are basically shutting down.
Even as the skin looks healthier than ever. So, to understand this massive biological disconnect, we're doing a deep dive today that goes completely off the beaten path.
Oh, cool.
We're bringing together two sources that honestly have zero business being in the same room. But when you put them together, they explain everything.
You really do.
The first source is this landmark scientific assessment published in the journal Science. It's this sweeping cross-national investigation by 24 of the world's top institutions.
Yeah, they basically mapped out the entire future of the European ecosystem through the 21st century.
Exactly. And the second source, it's a neurobiology study.
Right. On monkeys.
Yeah, on how the brains of monkeys evaluate rewards. Specifically, how a tiny cluster of neurons in a region called the striatum calculates the immediate payoff of a physical action.
It sounds crazy to link those, but it makes perfect sense when you dig in.
It's mind-blowing. Our mission today is to connect those dots. We want to show you how our biological wiring, that evolutionary drive to chase an immediate reward, is actively blinding us to this ecological countdown.
Right, because we aren't just talking about generic climate doom today.
No, not at all. We're getting into the physical mechanics of the collapse. And then we're going to look inside our own skulls to understand why we keep pulling the lever on our own destruction.
I mean, the contrast is what makes this so compelling.
Right.
We have this society capable of producing these incredibly detailed predictive models.
Decades into the future.
Right. But the biological hardware running the people reading those models, it completely struggles to prioritize anything beyond, an immediate payout.
So let's start by framing the sheer scale of this European ecosystem study. Because we see a lot of environmental studies, but this one is structurally different.
Oh, vastly different.
We're talking about researchers from the Potsdam Institute, Harvard, Oxford, and 20 others. They didn't just measure temperature and call it a day.
No, they attempted to build a comprehensive simulation of the entire future. And the scope is just staggering.
Tell us about the scope.
Well, they focused on the EU 15. So, for context, the 15 member countries of the European Union prior to the 2004 expansion, plus Norway and Switzerland.
Right.
And they integrated everything: socioeconomic factors, greenhouse gas concentrations, land use shifts, climate dynamics, everything.
And they did it on this microscopic scale, relatively speaking.
Yeah, a 10 by 10 minute latitude and longitude grid.
Okay, let's translate that for you listening. What does a 10 by 10 minute grid actually look like if you're standing on the ground?
Roughly, depending on where you are, it's about a 16 by 16 kilometer square.
Wow.
Imagine taking the entire map of Western Europe, laying a grid over it, and predicting the specific temperature, rainfall, crop yield, and species survival for every single little 16-kilometer box.
80 years into the future.
Exactly.
That is an insane level of resolution. And out of that map comes the first massive contradiction of this deep dive, the shrinking agriculture paradox.
This is where it gets really counterintuitive.
Right. Because if you ask anyone what the biggest threat to nature is, they'll probably say human population growth forcing us to pave over forests for farms.
We assume agriculture is just this ever-expanding monster.
But the data says the exact opposite for Europe.
Yeah, technology is aggressively changing the baseline here. The models project that farming is becoming so intensely efficient, crop yields are rising so steadily that by the 2080s, the actual physical land needed for food crops is going to shrink.
Shrink by over 10% in some scenarios. Just let that sink in. Taking a tenth of all the farms in Europe and just walking away from them.
And you hear that and think, fantastic, give it back to nature.
Right, let the wolves have it. But
Yeah,
the researchers are flashing massive red warning lights here because this quote-unquote surplus land is actually a fatal temptation.
it really is a trap.
So unpack that. Why is freeing up land a vulnerability?
Because it pulls this classic bait and switch on policymakers. When governments look at a spreadsheet and see surplus land, their modern economic instinct isn't conservation, it's extraction.
Oh,
It creates this false sense of security. They think, look, we have all this extra acreage. We don't need to worry about ecological limits. So instead of letting that land return to a stabilizing natural ecosystem, it encourages really dangerous trade-offs.
give me an example of one of those trade-offs.
Bioenergy farms.
Okay.
You take that abandoned food cropland and carpet it with fast-growing bioenergy crops, like certain types of willow or poplar, just to burn for fuel.
So on paper, it looks like a green energy win.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in reality, those crops are incredibly thirsty. They require heavy management. They strain local water tables and soil nutrients even further.
So the surplus land basically masks the underlying decay. It just looks like a new asset to leverage.
Spot on.
It's the Jevons paradox in action. Like when an automaker engineers a vastly more fuel-efficient car, you buy it, feel amazing about your carbon footprint, and then decide to take a road trip every single weekend.
And you end up burning way more fuel than before.
Exactly, completely defeating the purpose. Efficiency just breeds complacency, which accelerates consumption.
That is a perfect parallel. The technological gain that gives Europe this surplus land does absolutely nothing to protect it from the larger, invisible force that's reshaping everything.
Which brings us to the thermostat. Because we can't talk about surplus land or expanding forests without looking at the irreversible warming these researchers locked in.
The math here is clinical, but the implications are just brutal. Europe is locked into a temperature rise of between 2.1 and 4.4 degrees Celsius over this century.
Which I always struggle with how that's communicated to the public.
Because 4.4 degrees sounds like nothing.
Right. It sounds like the difference between wearing a t-shirt and, putting on a light sweater.
But in planetary physics, a 4-degree shift is epical.
Yeah, I mean, the difference between the pre-industrial world and an ice age with glaciers sitting on top of Chicago was roughly 5 or 6 degrees.
So 4.4 is basically engineering a completely new geological era in a few decades.
Exactly. But the crucial finding here isn't just the overall number. It's that this warming physically and economically tears Europe in half.
It's a profound north-south rupture.
So let's start up north, because if you're in, say, Sweden reading this report, you might quietly be popping champagne.
You really might be.
Yeah.
The models show Northern Europe getting very distinct short-term benefits. The warmer weather essentially unlocks the landscape for them.
In what way?
Well, high-latitude regions could see their suitable area for those bioenergy crops increase by up to 34%.
34%. That is a massive green gold rush.
They get milder winters, more rain, the growing seasons stretch out, the timber industry looks at forest growth rates and sees an absolute boom. On the surface, it looks like an era of unprecedented wealth.
But then you look south. You look at the Mediterranean, and the contrast is just horrifying. While the north gets greener, the south is being baked alive.
The study zeroes in heavily on the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, and the projections are incredibly grim. We're talking about a 27% drop in summer rainfall in certain scenarios.
And let's contextualize that. The Iberian Peninsula is already notoriously hot and dry in the summer.
Right.
A 27% drop isn't just a bad drought. That is a permanent structural collapse of their water cycle.
It accelerates desertification to the point where traditional agriculture simply fails. That bioenergy crop area we talked about. Down south, it violently contracts by 13%.
Wow.
In reality, they face a horizon where the soil is so depleted, literally nothing of economic value can survive the heat.
I want to pause here to make a really explicit point for you listening, because we need to talk about the different future scenarios these researchers used.
The A and B scenarios.
Right. They didn't just guess one future. They ran models through different socioeconomic pathways. The A scenarios, A1FI and A2, those are worlds prioritizing pure economic growth and fossil fuel.
Business as usual, basically.
Yeah. And then the B scenarios, B1 and B2 model a world that gets its act together. Environmental sustainability, clean tech, equity. Now, we are not here to debate the politics of which path society should choose.
Real.
What's utterly striking is that it almost doesn't matter which scenario you plug into the machine. The math is impartial. Whether you pick the hyper-capitalist A path or the green B path, the South pays the ultimate price.
That's the tragedy baked into the physics of the climate system. The momentum is already there, The B scenarios might soften the extreme edge, but they don't change the direction.
The Mediterranean is locked into severe drying.
Yeah.
Which brings us to our next contradiction. It's a riddle, really.
I love this one.
If you have places in Europe like parts of the Mediterranean where the population is actually decreasing due to lower birth rates, why is the water crisis in those exact areas exploding?
Because basic arithmetic says fewer people equals more water.
Right, exactly. Fewer people drinking, fewer washing, there should be a surplus.
But this is a phenomenal example of how annual averages blind us. We have to look at the baseline. Back in 1995, there were already 193 million people in Europe living under water stress.
And define water stress for us, just physically speaking.
It means the available fresh water in a river basin drops below the critical threshold needed to sustain the society built on it. You're drawing down the bank account faster than rain replenishes it.
Right.
Fast forward to the 2080s. Even if populations drop, the shadow of water stress expands massively. Up to 38% of the Mediterranean population will be pushed into severe water stress.
But how, if there are fewer locals, who is draining the aquifer?
It's the tourism paradox. You have to look at the population dynamically as a seasonal load on a failing grid.
Ah, the peak load.
Exactly. When does the Mediterranean get its absolute maximum influx of people? Summer. Millions of tourists arrive exactly when the temperature is highest. Evaporation is peaking, and natural rainfall is zero.
And tourists do not consume water like locals do.
Not even close. They take multiple showers a day to wash off salt water. They expect full swimming pools, massive water parks, and lush green golf courses in what should naturally be scrubland.
While right next door, the agricultural sector is desperately pumping groundwater to keep crops alive in the blistering heat.
You're extracting maximum resources at the exact moment of minimum supply. The infrastructure is pushed far beyond its physical limits.
But, the coastlines aren't acting in isolation. They rely on water that starts hundreds of miles away.
Right, inland.
Yeah, so let's move inland and talk about the Alps, because the mechanism of failure here is completely counterintuitive.
The Alps are basically the water towers of Europe. The whole continent's hydrology relies on them. They capture winter precipitation as snow and ice and slowly release it through spring and summer.
Feeding the Rhine, the Rhone, the Danube.
Exactly. It lets barges move goods in August and farmers irrigate in July.
Okay, so let's play out a hypothesis. The climate gets warmer, which means more moisture in the air.
True.
So wouldn't that mean more winter precipitation falling in the Alps? More water overall sounds like a good thing.
You get more winter precipitation, yes. Winter runoff actually surges, but that surge is the disaster.
How is more water a disaster?
Because the system isn't designed for liquid water in January. The grid relies on the snowpack acting as a massive frozen battery. It holds the water in the mountains when nobody in the valleys needs it. But with warming, the precipitation hits the thermal barrier and doesn't freeze. It falls as rain.
So the battery can't hold the charge.
Right. It just flows down the mountain immediately. You get massive winter floods in the valleys, and the water just washes out to sea.
And then summer arrives.
And the battery's empty. The snowpack never formed. The models show summer runoff, when farmers in cities desperately need it, plummets by 46%.
A near halving of the water supply when demand is at its peak.
And the peak river flow shifts 2 entire months earlier in the calendar.
So you have flooded cities in February and barges stuck on dry riverbeds in August.
The total annual amount of water might be similar, but the timing is utterly destroyed.
And human civilization is entirely predicated on timing. If we want to look at a highly localized economic consequence of this, we just have to look at Swiss ski resorts.
This is such a stark example.
The study models this remarkably specific, seemingly tiny change, a 300-meter rise in the Alpine snowline.
Which is roughly the height of the Eiffel Tower.
Right. If you're looking up at a massive alpine peak, a 300-meter difference in where the snow starts seems negligible.
Visually, maybe. Economically, it's an invisible wall.
The researchers found that this tiny shift drops the reliability of Swiss ski resorts from 85% down to 63%.
That is a death sentence for a business model.
Let's think about the mechanics of that. If you have an 85% reliable snowpack, you have a bankable business. You can get a loan, build a hotel, hire hundreds of seasonal workers.
Because the odds are in your favor.
Exactly. But if your reliability drops to 63%, almost 4 out of 10 years, you have no snow.
You have no product, you can't service your debt, no bank will lend to you.
You wouldn't board a flight if it only had a 63% chance of making it. The white snow vanishes. and an entire mountain community's economy falls off a cliff overnight.
It perfectly illustrates how vulnerable we are at the margins. A slight temperature change causes centuries-old economic models to collapse.
But, humans at least have economies and insurance. We can relocate our capital. The wildlife cannot. Which brings us to the animals trapped in a prison that we built for them.
The extinction trap. This is one of the most tragic failures in the whole assessment.
Let me pose another hypothetical. Let's pretend every animal and plant in Europe has a magic GPS. They know exactly where the cooler climate band is moving to the north, and they can physically migrate there with no barriers.
Okay.
Even in that impossible scenario, they're still doomed, right?
Yes, because of the architecture of human conservation. Over the last century, Europe set aside about 20% of its land mass as protected nature reserves.
We drew lines on a map and said, inside this polygon, nature is safe.
But the climate doesn't recognize polygons. The climate is shifting north. The specific temperature band a rare butterfly relies on is moving. The habitat is literally sliding off the map.
So the species must move, but the protection cannot move with them.
The borders are static. They're cemented by complex legal frameworks and private property rights. You can't just knock on a German farmer's door and say, your cornfield is now a strictly protected national park because a rare bird just flew here from Italy.
So these highly managed havens become death traps.
They become heating ecological islands. The species realize the temperature is wrong, so they flee outward straight into heavily industrialized farms or highways, where they're immediately decimated.
And the numbers are staggering.
Up to 59% of species in a given grid could be lost.
59%.
And mountain species can't go any higher. They literally run out of mountain. Mediterranean species are trapped between the sea and the advancing desert.
And while the species are vanishing, the landscape behind them is igniting. Let's go back to the Iberian Peninsula and talk about fire.
We established the total collapse of their summer rainfall. Now add rising temperatures, and you get a massive acceleration in forest fires.
The numbers are apocalyptic.
The models project a 112% increase in the burned area of Iberian forests in just a few decades.
Over double the land turning to ash. And we aren't just talking about generic pine trees.
No, we're talking about the erasure of a cultural identity. The cork oak, the holm oak, species that define the visual soul of the region for millennia. The landscape burns, and it doesn't grow back as forest. It grows back as arid scrubland.
Okay, wait. Stop right there. I have to push back here because we're hitting a massive logical contradiction. I literally opened this deep dive by stating as a fact that Europe's forests are expanding.
Yes, you did.
So how can the Iberian Peninsula be burning to the ground while at the exact same time the study says European forests are expanding?
This is the crux of the green illusion. We have to separate the quantity of land covered in trees from the quality of the biological work those trees are actually doing.
Okay, explain that.
The total physical area of forests is increasing, mostly due to agricultural abandonment and aggressive planting up north. But a forest is not just a collection of vertical wood. It's a biological engine.
So more trees does not automatically equal a healthier ecosystem.
Exactly. And the most startling proof is hidden in the B1 scenario data.
Quick reminder for you listening. B1 is the environmentally conscious, low-emissions scenario.
Under B1, society prioritizes conservation. We stop logging. We leave the forests alone. But because of that lack of human management, the actual increment of wood growth, the new biological material added each year, drops by 10%.
Wait, I need to make sure I understand the mechanism. We leave the forest alone and it grows less. That feels entirely backward.
It has to do with the age structure. When you stop clearing mature trees, you don't make room for saplings. The forest rapidly ages.
Right.
An old-growth forest is visually stunning, but from a metabolic standpoint, it's slow growing. The canopy closes, sunlight doesn't hit the floor, and the aggressive growth phase stops.
It becomes a stagnant system.
It stops pulling its weight in capturing new carbon.
Which shatters this massive assumption we all hold. We treat forests like infinite magical sponges that will just suck up our greenhouse gases forever.
But the models drop the hammer on that. The sponge has a capacity limit, and heat changes its physics. The study asserts that by the year 2050, the lungs of Europe will fail.
Actually, we need a better metaphor than lungs. Lungs breathe in and out. If the forest fails, what happens?
Think of it as a biological battery. Right now, Europe's terrestrial biosphere is a net carbon sink. It absorbs more than it releases. The battery is charging.
Okay.
But as the ambient temperature rises, something invisible happens underground. Heat triggers a massive increase in soil respiration.
Explain how soil respiration works. Why does the dirt care about the temperature?
Soil is teeming with microscopic life bacteria, fungi. They eat dead organic matter, and when they metabolize it, they exhale carbon dioxide.
Oh, I see where this is going.
What happens to metabolism when you apply heat?
It speeds up dramatically.
The heat acts like an accelerant. The microbes start eating and exhaling at a hyperactive rate. By 2050, the sheer volume of carbon exhaled by the soil will completely overpower whatever the aging trees above ground can absorb.
So the battery overcharges with heat, swells, and starts leaking toxic acid back out. The forests flip from being our savior to actually contributing to the problem.
The sink becomes a source. It's a silent, invisible hemorrhage. You could stand in a Bavarian forest in 2060, look around at lush green leaves, and think it's healthy. But beneath your boots, the soil is bleeding carbon into the atmosphere.
And the study quantifies this, right?
Yes. They project Europe will permanently lose between 0.1 and 4.8 gigatons of soil organic carbon.
4.8 gigatons, that's an incomprehensible volume of organic matter.
And the worst part,
What?
the most devastating losses aren't in the wild forests, they're in the agricultural lands.
The dirt Europe relies on to feed itself is rotting from the inside out, completely invisibly.
It's a systemic failure masked by a superficial green facade.
Which brings us to the massive glaring question hanging over this entire conversation.
Yeah.
If the data is this precise 16-kilometer grids from 24 top institutions, and they know the soil is dying, the water is vanishing, why aren't the people working the land screaming from the rooftops?
It makes no logical sense.
Right. Why does a farmer in Andalusia look at a failing ecosystem and just keep doing the exact same thing? Why are we calmly walking into the fire?
To answer that, we have to completely shift gears. We have to leave the forests, zoom way in, and step into a neurobiology lab.
This is where our second source comes in, and this pivot is just endlessly fascinating to me because it explains the human blind spot.
It really does.
I want you to picture a laboratory. Inside, there is a macaque monkey sitting in front of a panel with a left handle and a right handle. Its entire job is to guess which handle will give it a squirt of delicious juice.
This is the landmark Semijima study. The neurobiologists were looking at a specific region of the brain called the striatum.
Which handles decision-making and processing rewards.
Exactly. It sits deep in the subcortical region.
So put yourself in the monkey's shoes. You pull the left handle, maybe you get juice. You pull the right, maybe you get juice. Through trial and error, you learn which one pays out better.
But the researchers wanted to know what is physically happening inside the brain's wetware while it learns.
And what do they find?
They discovered that our brains, both monkeys and humans, are hardwired to calculate action-specific reward values.
What does that mean in plain English?
It means your brain runs a constant subconscious equation. If I perform action X, exactly how much reward will I get and what is the probability?
Like if I pull the left handle, I get juice 80% of the time.
Exactly. We optimize for the immediate, predictable payout, and specific midbrain dopamine neurons encode these expectations.
Right.
When the monkey gets the juice, dopamine is released. It travels to the striatum and physically alters the neural pathways, thickening what are called corticostriatal synapses.
Let's visualize that. Think of a corticostriatal synapse, like a bridge between the part of your brain that plans a movement and the part that processes the reward.
I like that analogy.
Every time you pull the handle and get the juice, the dopamine acts like a construction crew, adding another lane to that bridge. Eventually, it becomes a massive highway, and the action becomes an automatic habit.
The brain physically rewires itself. It says, this was a highly successful survival strategy. Do it again.
But here is the critical limitation. The brain doesn't care about the big picture.
Not at all. The striatum is a ruthless machine for optimizing local, immediate rewards. It doesn't pause to consider long-term consequences.
It doesn't ask if the juice machine is catching fire tomorrow.
Exactly. It just knows. Handle equals juice. Survive today.
So let's take this neurobiological mechanism and drop it straight back into the dying agricultural fields of Europe. This is the absolute crux of everything we're talking about today.
Just the aha moment.
Why does a European farmer ignore the dropping water table and the bleeding carbon?
Because of the massive convoluted maze of agricultural subsidies. The Common Agricultural Policy.
Right, the CAP.
The EU operates one of the largest subsidy frameworks on the planet.
Ah.
And historically, it pays farmers based on the sheer physical area of their land. or for achieving specific yields of heavily subsidized crops.
The subsidy check is the squirt of juice.
Precisely. The subsidy mechanism artificially severs the farmer's financial survival from the actual long-term health of the ecosystem.
Let's play this out. Imagine a farmer in southern Spain. The soil is visibly degrading. The well is drawing up salty water. The scientific models clearly say this farm will be a desert in 40 years.
But the farmer striatum cannot process a 40-year ecological model.
The farmer striatum is processing the annual subsidy cycle.
Exactly. They walk out to the field, and they pull the lever, they plow the acreage, plant the thirsty subsidized corn, apply the synthetic fertilizer.
And at the end of the season, the government delivers the juice, the money hits the bank account.
And just like the monkey, the dopamine circuit floods the synapses, the brain reinforces the behavior. The farmer isn't being malicious. They're acting entirely rationally according to their biology and the artificial economic game they're trapped in.
They are masterfully pulling the handle, while the machine they're standing on is literally catching fire.
That is the ultimate synthesis here. The ecological data proves the machine is breaking down. The neurobiological data shows exactly why the operator can't see the smoke. The reward values are just completely misaligned with physical reality.
And what makes this so incredibly frustrating is that Europe is uniquely positioned to fix this. They're in a totally backward situation compared to the rest of the world.
If you look at global trends, the contrast is stark.
Yeah, globally, we're terrified of population explosions. The Amazon is being slashed and burned for cattle. The narrative is too many humans, too few trees.
But Europe has stable or gently shrinking populations, a growing physical footprint of forest land, shrinking agricultural land needs. On paper, they are the green oasis.
They have all the breathing room in the world to fix the underlying rot. They have that surplus land we talked about.
They have a unique historical opportunity to lower their vulnerability. But because their economic reward systems, the handles they're pulling, are disconnected from the health of the soil and water, they're squandering it.
Walking blindfolded right into a trap they built themselves.
It's a profound, interlocking failure of human institutions and human biology.
So we have the biological mechanism for our blindness, the dopamine loop in the striatum, and we have the hyper-detailed 16-kilometer grid data predicting our ecological crash. Where does that leave us?
It leaves us at an incredibly difficult crossroads.
Because there's no easy, magical way out. The science study makes that painfully clear.
We looked at the different scenarios. Pure economic focus, the A scenarios, where we chase material wealth without ecological guardrails, destroys the environment. It burns the Iberian Peninsula, dries up the Alps, bankrupts the ski resorts.
But the green utopia isn't real either. The environmental B scenarios bring their own massive vulnerabilities.
Right. If you just lock nature away behind invisible borders that can't move, you get aging, stagnant forests that leak carbon. You still face massive water crises in the south because the thermal momentum is already locked in.
The takeaway is that true sustainability doesn't mean rejecting economic prosperity, and it doesn't mean letting nature run entirely wild without management either.
It requires a fundamental rewiring of our society. We have to align our biological reward systems with ecological reality.
We have to design an economy where the squirt of juice, the subsidy, the profit, is directly dependent on the long-term health of the soil and water, not just mindlessly pulling the agricultural lever.
If we pull back the lens one final time to the grandest scale of human history, we've seen this exact mechanism play out before.
The ghosts of ancient collapses.
Look at the Maya, the Western Roman Empire, the Sumerians. Historians used to say they fell because of invading armies or moral decay, but modern evidence shows a different trigger.
The ecological debt.
Yes. They collapse because they suddenly and irrevocably exhausted their localized ecosystem services. They deforested hillsides to build monuments. They salted their fields through over-irrigation.
They had a ruling class and a farming class whose brains were wired the exact same way ours are.
They pulled the lever of immediate reward, more grain, more timber, more expansion, right up until the local environment could no longer support the physical weight of their society. The machine simply powered down.
And here we are, doing the exact same thing. We just have satellite data, computer models, and vastly more complex levers to pull.
The scale is larger, but the underlying biological mechanism driving the operator is identical.
Which leaves us with a terrifying but absolutely necessary final thought. And I want to pose this directly to you listening to this right now. You've seen the data today. The lush, expanding forests are an illusion masking a soil that is bleeding out its carbon. The water cycle is fracturing, the fires in the south are doubling, the Alpine snow is melting. And inside your own head, millions of years of evolutionary engineering have hardwired your brain to relentlessly chase immediate rewards, completely ignoring the smoke filling the room. If our neurobiology fundamentally limits our ability to subconsciously react to a slow-moving, invisible ecological crisis, can we consciously force ourselves to rewrite our own economic and political reward systems fast enough to save the very life support system keeping us alive? Or are we just the next ancient empire, sitting in a vastly more complex laboratory, eagerly pulling the lever for a tiny drop of juice, right up until the machine powers down forever?